Imagine hiring the best cook in New York City. Your friends rave about her. Her peach ice cream is legendary. Wealthy families fight to employ her. 2 weeks later, your daughter collapses with fever. Then your wife. Then the maids. One by one, everyone in your household falls desperately ill. The cook? Perfectly healthy. She quits before anyone can ask questions and moves to her next job. This happened to 8 families in a row. 22 people infected. 3 dead. Her name was Mary Mallon. But history remembers her as Typhoid Mary, America's first known healthy carrier of a deadly disease. And here's the twisted part. After authorities caught her and forced her into quarantine, after she promised never to cook again, she changed her name and went right back into wealthy kitchens. This time, she infected a maternity hospital. 25 cases. 2 dead mothers. This is the story of the woman who spread death through dessert. And the impossible choice between one person's freedom and public safety. Subscribe right now if you want dark history they don't teach in schools. Hit that bell. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because Mary Mallon's story isn't just about disease. It's about class. It's about gender. It's about immigration. It's about what happens when science discovers something so terrifying that society doesn't know how to handle it ethically. And it's about a woman who refused to believe she was dangerous, even as people kept dying around her. New York City, 1900, where wealthy families lived in luxury while immigrants crowded into filthy tenements. Where typhoid fever killed thousands every year in the slums. But when typhoid came to the mansions, that's when people started asking questions. Let's talk about the cook who wouldn't wash her hands. Mary Mallon was born September 23, 1869, in Cookstown, County Tyrone, Ireland. Fitting name for someone who'd become a legendary cook. She immigrated to America as a teenager in 1883 or 1884, moving in with her aunt and uncle in New York City. Like thousands of Irish women, she found work as a domestic servant. But Mary was exceptional in the kitchen. She could prepare elaborate French cuisine. Her desserts were works of art. And she had one signature dish that wealthy families absolutely loved. Homemade ice cream with fresh peaches, sliced by hand and frozen into the cream. In an era before refrigeration, when most families ate whatever their cook could manage, Mary's culinary skills made her incredibly valuable. She could command higher wages than most domestic servants. She moved from mansion to mansion, always in demand. The families who employed her had names like Bowen, Warren, Thompson, old money New Yorkers who lived in townhouses on Park Avenue and summer estates in Long Island. Mary was single, middle-aged, with an Irish brogue she never lost. She was tall, heavy-set, and intimidating when angry. But in the kitchen, she was an artist. Between 1900 and 1906, Mary worked for 8 different families. At the first house in Mamaroneck in 1900, residents developed fever and diarrhea within 2 weeks of her arrival. In 1901, she moved to Manhattan. Again, family members fell ill. The family laundress died. Mary saw the pattern. She knew something was wrong, so she'd quit before anyone could connect her to the outbreaks and move to the next job. 7 out of 8 families she cooked for contracted typhoid fever. But typhoid was everywhere in New York at the time. In 1906 alone, about 3,000 New Yorkers contracted the disease. Killed roughly 10% of those infected. The disease came from contaminated water and food. It spread through the crowded, unsanitary tenements where immigrants lived. Sewage mixing with drinking water. No indoor plumbing. No understanding of germs. Wealthy families didn't get typhoid. They had clean water, modern plumbing, sanitation. They were supposed to be safe. So when 6 members of banker Charles Henry Warren's household fell sick at their Oyster Bay summer estate in August 1906, it was shocking. Oyster Bay was the playground of New York's elite. President Theodore Roosevelt's summer White House was right there at Sagamore Hill. The Warrens' landlord panicked. Nobody would rent his property if word got out about typhoid. He needed answers. He hired George Soper. George Soper was a sanitary engineer, basically an early epidemiologist. He'd investigated typhoid outbreaks before. He knew how to trace contamination. He started with the obvious suspects, The plumbing? He put dye in the toilets to see if sewage was leaking into drinking water. Nothing. The local shellfish? He tested samples from Oyster Bay. Clean. The milk supply? No bacteria. The well water? Perfectly safe. Soper was stumped. 6 people sick with typhoid. No contamination source. Then he learned something interesting. The outbreak started about 3 weeks after the family hired a new cook, Mary Mallon. And 3 weeks was exactly the incubation period for typhoid fever. Soper dug into Mary's employment history. What he found was stunning. 7 of the 8 families she'd worked for since 1900 had reported typhoid. 22 people infected total. 1 child dead. But here's what really clinched it for Soper. Mary's specialty dessert. Ice cream with fresh peaches. Most of Mary's cooking involved high heat, roasting, baking, frying. The heat would have killed any bacteria. But her famous ice cream? She made it by hand. Cut fresh peaches. Mixed them into cream. Never cooked. The perfect vehicle for spreading Salmonella typhi, the bacteria that causes typhoid fever. And Mary, Soper discovered, admitted she almost never washed her hands. In 1906, hand washing wasn't universal. The germ theory of disease, the idea that invisible microbes caused illness, was still relatively new. Many people, especially those without formal education, didn't fully accept it. Mary was perfectly healthy, never sick a day in her life. Why would she need to wash her hands? Soper had solved the mystery, but now he faced a bigger problem. He had to tell Mary Mallon that she was a walking plague. March 1907. Soper tracked Mary to her next job, a Park Avenue mansion where she was cooking for another wealthy family. He walked into the kitchen and, by his own account, tried to be as diplomatic as possible. He explained his theory, told her she was carrying typhoid bacteria, said she'd infected multiple families, asked her to provide samples, blood, urine, feces, so he could prove it scientifically. Mary's response? She grabbed a carving fork and chased him out of the house. Can you blame her? Some stranger walks into your workplace and accuses you of killing people. Says you're diseased when you feel perfectly fine. Wants samples of your shit. Mary had built a good life. She made decent money. She had professional pride. She'd never been sick. And now this guy was threatening to destroy everything. Soper didn't give up. He enlisted help from the New York City Health Department. Specifically, Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker, a pioneering female doctor who worked in public health. On March 19, 1907, Dr. Baker showed up at the Park Avenue mansion with 5 police officers. Mary saw them coming. She ran. For 5 hours, they searched the mansion and grounds. Finally, they spotted a scrap of calico fabric, Mary's dress, sticking out from under the door of a storage closet. They dragged her out. She fought like an angry lion. According to Dr. Baker, it took all 5 officers to get her into the ambulance. Dr. Baker had to sit on Mary the entire ride to Willard Parker Hospital to keep her from escaping. At the hospital, they forcibly took samples. Mary was restrained for 4 days, not even allowed to use the bathroom alone. The test results were undeniable. Her feces contained massive amounts of typhoid bacteria. The source? Her gallbladder. Mary Mallon was an asymptomatic carrier, the first one ever identified in the United States. She harbored Salmonella typhi in her gallbladder, shedding billions of bacteria every time she used the bathroom. When she didn't wash her hands afterward, she contaminated everything she touched, especially the fresh peaches she sliced by hand for her famous ice cream. On March 19, 1907, the same day she was captured, Mary Mallon was sentenced to quarantine. Not prison, not a hospital. Quarantine. They sent her to North Brother Island. North Brother Island sits in the East River between the Bronx and Rikers Island. It's about 16 acres, tiny, isolated, connected to the mainland only by boat. The island housed Riverside Hospital, where New York City sent people with contagious diseases, smallpox patients, tuberculosis cases, and now Mary Mallon. She wasn't sick. She had no symptoms. She wasn't receiving treatment because there was no treatment. Antibiotics wouldn't be discovered for another 40 years. She was simply imprisoned indefinitely because her body was a biohazard. Mary lived in a small cottage on the island with only a dog for company. She could see the city across the water, Manhattan's skyline, boats passing, normal life continuing without her. She'd been jailed without a trial. No conviction, no sentence. Just indefinite detention because public health officials decided she was too dangerous to live freely. In 1909, Mary sued for her release. The case raised questions we're still debating today. Can the government forcibly quarantine a healthy person? Where's the line between individual rights and public safety? What happens when one person's freedom threatens everyone around them? Mary lost the case, but public opinion was shifting. Newspapers that had called her a human culture tube and walking typhoid factory now portrayed her as a victim, an immigrant woman locked up without due process, a medical prisoner. In 1910, a new health commissioner took over. He decided to release Mary, but with conditions. She could never work as a cook again, ever. She had to take hygiene precautions to avoid infecting others. She had to check in regularly with health officials. Mary agreed to everything. She was desperate for freedom. On February 19, 1910, she signed an affidavit promising to change her occupation and give assurance that she would do everything in her power to prevent the spread of typhoid fever. They let her go. She lasted 5 years. After her release, Mary tried to make it as a laundress. But the pay was terrible, a fraction of what she'd earned as a cook. She was a single middle-aged Irish immigrant woman with no family, no savings, no husband. Cooking was the only skill that paid well. Health officials lost track of her. Maybe they thought the problem was solved. It wasn't. In January 1915, a typhoid outbreak erupted at Sloan Maternity Hospital in Manhattan. 25 people infected, doctors, nurses, staff, new mothers. 2 people died. Health officials investigated. They found a cook in the hospital kitchen who'd been hired just 3 months earlier. Her name? Mrs. Mary Brown. It was Mary Mallon. She'd changed her name and gone right back to cooking. When authorities caught her, she was returned to North Brother Island. This time there was no sympathy, no public outcry, no second chance. She'd been given her freedom and immediately violated the terms. She'd known the risks and cooked anyway. She'd infected a maternity hospital, new mothers and medical staff. Public opinion turned completely against her. This time, she stayed on North Brother Island for 23 years, until her death. But here's what makes Mary's story even more complicated. By 1915, health authorities had identified other asymptomatic typhoid carriers in New York City. Tony Labella, an Italian immigrant food worker, reportedly caused outbreaks in 1922 that infected over 100 people and killed 5. Typhoid John, an Adirondack guide, infected 36 people and killed 2. Alphonse Codels, a restaurant and bakery owner, infected dozens. By the time Mary died in 1938, New York City had identified over 400 healthy typhoid carriers. None of them were forcibly quarantined. None of them spent decades in isolation. Just Mary. Why? Let's talk about why Mary Mallon spent 26 years of her life in quarantine while hundreds of other carriers walked free. Theory 1. She refused to cooperate. Unlike other carriers, Mary never accepted that she was dangerous. She insisted until her death that she'd never been sick, never had typhoid, couldn't possibly be spreading it. Other carriers, once informed, took precautions. They changed careers. They washed their hands obsessively. They accepted the science. Mary didn't. She violated her release terms immediately. Theory 2. She was high profile. Mary's case made national headlines. Newspapers called her Typhoid Mary, a nickname that stuck. She became the public face of asymptomatic carriers. Once she was famous, authorities couldn't let her go without looking weak. Theory 3. Class and gender. Mary was a working-class Irish immigrant woman. Single. No powerful connections. No family to advocate for her. Tony Labella was also an immigrant, but male. Typhoid John was an Adirondack guide, working with wealthy sportsmen. Alphonse Codels owned a business. Mary was the perfect target for authorities who needed to demonstrate control over public health but didn't want to antagonize powerful people. Theory 4. The peach ice cream. Mary's specialty dessert was uniquely dangerous. She personally handled uncooked food, cutting fresh peaches by hand with unwashed fingers. Other carriers worked in contexts where cooking killed the bacteria. Mary's signature dish was the perfect disease vector. But honestly, the real answer is probably all of the above. Mary made herself easy to demonize. She was defiant. She refused to believe the science. And when given a chance, she immediately went back to the one job that maximized her danger to others. From a public health standpoint, she was a nightmare. A super spreader who wouldn't stop spreading. From a human rights standpoint, she was a victim. A woman imprisoned indefinitely without trial, held to a standard not applied to male carriers. Both things can be true. Christmas morning, 1932. A man delivering something to North Brother Island found Mary Mallon on the floor of her cottage, paralyzed. She'd suffered a massive stroke. She never walked again. For 6 years, she lived in Riverside Hospital on the island, unable to move. She'd spent 26 years in quarantine. Now she'd spend her final years paralyzed. She died November 11, 1938, at age 69. Cause of death: pneumonia. 9 people attended her funeral. After 26 years of isolation, she had almost no one left. Her body was buried at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx, not far from the island where she'd spent most of her adult life. An autopsy, though some sources dispute whether one actually happened, reportedly found live typhoid bacteria still multiplying in her gallbladder. Even after death, her body was producing the bacteria that had defined her life. Mary Mallon's name became a cultural touchstone. Typhoid Mary entered the language as slang for anyone who spreads disease or bad luck. It's used casually today. Don't invite her. She's Typhoid Mary. Meaning, she brings problems wherever she goes. But the real Mary Mallon was a lot more complex than the legend. She was a talented cook who took pride in her work. An immigrant who'd built a successful career through skill and determination. A woman who never understood why her healthy body was treated as a weapon. And she was also someone who, when told she was killing people, refused to stop doing the thing that spread death. Both things are true. So what's the lesson here? Mary Mallon's story forces us to ask impossible questions. When does one person's freedom become everyone else's danger? Who decides? How do we balance individual rights against public safety? We're still fighting about these questions today. COVID-19 brought back every debate from Mary's era. Asymptomatic carriers, mandatory quarantines, personal freedom versus public health. Who gets punished and why? Mary Mallon infected at least 51 people. 3 confirmed deaths, possibly as many as 50 if you count unverified cases. All because she refused to accept that her healthy body carried death. Was she a victim of sexism and classism? Absolutely. Was she also dangerous and reckless? Also yes. History isn't simple. People aren't simple. Mary Mallon was both victim and perpetrator. Oppressed and dangerous. Wronged and wrong. She spent 26 years imprisoned for a crime she insisted she didn't commit. Spreading a disease she claimed not to have. And every day, across the water, she could see the city she'd once worked in, the kitchens she'd commanded, the families who'd praised her cooking, all of it taken away because her body was a weapon she refused to believe she was carrying. So here's my question. If you were Mary Mallon, healthy, feeling fine, told by authorities you were killing people you couldn't see, couldn't feel, would you have believed them? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story made you think about the impossible choices between freedom and safety, subscribe, hit that bell, and share this with someone who isn't afraid of complicated history. Until next time, wash your damn hands.